Great to be here with everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Jonay, Holkins, founder and CEO of Trendline Strategies. We are a strategic advisory firm that supports organizations with understanding the intersection of law, policy, and business.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Eric Hollister Williams. I'm a senior vice president at One Strategy Group. And similarly, we are a strategic advisory firm that focuses largely on C-suite and advising our clients and executives on how to create moments and make the most out of those moments using our communications background, but also just thinking about each of the organizations and what moves them, their mission, their values, and how do we tell stories.
Well, this session couldn't come at a more important and urgent time because it is about the value of communications in a hyper-connected world, especially as it concerns the workplace. And if Michael's in the room, he is very clever in the way he organized the agenda because the first session was about an overarching, how do we use our power in the workplace in terms of communications. The second one, we get to talk about why our jobs are extremely hard and challenging at any time, but especially now. And then the last 3 sessions are about tactics and strategies that we could use to improve the workplace and improve how we do our jobs. So we get the fun task of just telling everybody and reminding us, we do really important work and it is really tough. And I can't wait to hear all the war stories about how that goes. And we can just jump right into it. Communications remains undervalued. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. I guess I'll take first bite at the apple. I might actually reframe it just slightly and say that I think in some places and instances, comms can be undervalued. In some places, there's tremendous value in that executives, leaders of organizations have placed and have said comms needs a seat at the table. And so I think it's understanding the tension between the two, which is how do you think about comms and what type of priority do you want to make for it and with it? When you think about it, in some ways, distilling it down, it's about relationships, right? It's relationships with the comms function. It's the relationship with the communicators that are within that function. And you have to think critically about, is it of value to the organization? How do we ensure that we're getting the most and the best out of this team that will ultimately benefit the organization, its mission? How can it be a force multiplier in terms of reaching those goals and objectives that have been set out, hopefully by the leaders and the leadership? And so when we think about undervaluing, I think it's a thought about how can we improve the relationship so that the function and those within it are benefiting the organization. I'll pause there.
Yeah, and I actually want to just push back on the notion that it's undervalued at all, because I think when you look at your big brands, even your small businesses, they understand the importance of having a clear message, having a clear value proposition for whatever it is that they're trying to sell, and then also being able to talk about that and message it in a way that reaches their desired stakeholders, right? And so, I mean, the same is true for nonprofit organizations. I think it's entirely a missed opportunity for organizations of any kind to not value comms, not value how they present themselves, and not value how they message their product and services. And so I would say that folks are missing the mark if they're not valuing comms. But I think the best organizations, the best brands, the best nonprofits do a masterful job of communicating what it is that they're trying to communicate to their intended audiences. And so, we've seen instances of where it is undervalued, but I think I think most folks would agree that there's immense value to communications and having strong communications professionals around you.
Could I add as well, I think one almost tell about the value prop there for comms is what's the interaction? What's the back and forth? What are the conversations like? Are the communicators in a particular organization, are they able to spread out in the organization and establish relationships with the people who they may be supporting or working with. Certainly at the places where I've most recently come, relationships are so key. You've got these relatively large teams, and each of those communicators has to be responsible for just a piece of the pie. They've got to develop those relationships with those leaders across the business and bring information back to kind of a centralized place, distill that information that they've learned and share that with more senior people at comms, and then start to make decisions. And then it's that back and forth, that play. And it's not always vertical and then horizontal, or what is it, vertical and horizontal, but it's just that interplay. And so if you see that not happening, it starts to give you a sense of how well or not that comms function is integrated into the organization.
Can I piggyback on that? Because I think that's such a brilliant point. And when I think back to my career and some of the jobs that I've had, both in policy, on the Hill, supporting members of Congress, but then also at other nonprofit organizations, comms were almost always at the table for the big conversations and even the strategy, right? And so I think bringing comms in early is also just very smart. And so I want to just one up that point, Eric.
So you both are immensely positive about it not being undervalued, but I do have a question. There's a lot of people in the audience who work in the private sector, who work in government, who work in the nonprofit sector, and comms being undervalued might look like a meeting constantly being cut short. It might be no path for promotion. It might be you work in a startup environment and there's no budget and no money to do comms, even though your CEO might desperately need it. So in those situations, why do you think that might be? And what convincing do you think needs to be done to make it more valued? Because that conversation can be very hard.
Yeah, so I guess, yes, I guess we've been positive, but I would also say that it's a mixed bag. And so there are tons of examples, and some of the questions that you've raised and kind of almost many case studies are spot on. It's about, I think, finding a good comms leader first, right? Please push back if you disagree. In my mind, so it's finding that comms leader first that's able to be an evangelist, right? Who's able to really help more senior leaders to understand the value of the function and the role. There's a lot of work that needs to happen, right? Which is how could we plus this up in a way that really benefits the mission? That there's that value alignment thing that happens. And it's across, whether it's business or nonprofit or even in policy and politics, right? It's how can we better achieve our objectives with a function that is plussed up. And those conversations are going to happen about resourcing, right? I think oftentimes when we think about resourcing, we think about money, financial resources, but I think there's so many other ways to think about it, right? Which is, wanting to prevent burnout, wanting to ensure that you're adequately staffed, maybe as it aligns to burnout, making sure that you're thinking about the competencies of a team, from a speechwriter to someone who really focuses on social and digital, to someone who is an all teams player and can kind of slot in wherever, to someone who may have subject matter expertise, because we're going to be spending a lot of time thinking about vaccines or a lot of time thinking about infrastructure. And so we need to have people with a certain level of expertise that's going to help to drive this agenda that has been set by a senior leader forward. That's a partial answer to your question.
Let's change gears a little bit then. It's still along the same lines. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path? And along the way, how do you think the organizations that you could have worked for better developed or invested in your talent?
Yeah, I'll start here. So I am, a attorney by training. I went to law school at the University of Arizona and then moved to clerking, also in the District of Arizona Federal Court. And I always knew I wanted to go back to DC. And so during that time, I had positions at the White House as an intern in White House counsel's office and also on the Hill as a fellow. Made my way back and was a litigator for almost 4 years and decided I didn't want to be a partner because it didn't really speak to me. I don't know. And we were also in a moment where this was also Trump's. By the time I decided to make the shift, it was during the first term of Trump 1.0, and I saw some of the impact of his policies on some of the clients that I was representing, and wanted to kind of get in the game. So I left my high-paying law firm job to go work on the Hill as counsel for a member of Congress who was willing to kind of be one of the first out there around how he positioned himself around the president. And so I had the honor of being able to support him on a number of issues on the Judiciary Committee, some tech issues as well. And that was, I think, a very formative experience for me, because it was one of those times where I had to know a little about a lot of things, and constantly tested, and being able to turn around talking points within an hour, 2 hours, because he's going to speak on this issue that just popped on his calendar. And that is a skill that I think my law school training actually helped me develop. It's not per se comms, but there's a lot to learn through how you think and set up problems, and how you then communicate them out. And so I would say that, like, my career pathway, while not traditional comms, I've had the ability to write speeches for members of Congress.
To be fair, you clerked, and I clerked too, and I always say that was my first ghostwriting job, was ghostwriting for a judge.
Accurate. Very accurate. Also a very fun job. I would do that over, but I moved from the Hill to a more conservative business association, where I was supporting CEOs of Fortune 500 companies on some of the top issues that were before them. My primary focus was around workforce development, and so did a lot around corporate initiatives for that association, and being able to be at the table with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Again, also having to be very clear in your communication, and making sure you're putting the points that are most important to them up front. And so it's a bit about my career, but Eric, what about you?
Yeah. I think I've also had a kind of an interesting journey through comms, I guess professionally. Out of college, I studied English with whatever slightly more than a minor is in biology, and didn't really know what I wanted to do after, and I ended up doing an internship at APCA Worldwide, which then transformed into a job at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the very, very beginning of the foundation's kind of long storied history. And then that motivated me to go to public health school, and so kind of looked in a different direction from public affairs comms role that I had, and kind of started to focus in on policy. And I did policy for a number of years, ended up working on Capitol Hill for then Representative Karen Bass, and focused on global health and international organizations, and kind of U.S.-Africa policy. After that, went and did strategic philanthropic work, where, as I've said before, and we shared this a little bit earlier, none of these roles, and I'll continue with the journey, but none of these roles, or these middle roles, were really comms, but I say that we're all communicators in a way, because we're taking complex ideas, distilling them down, and telling stories. Those stories then beget engagement for whether we need a policy change, or we're trying to bring people on board for a campaign. And so we're constantly thinking about how to connect with people. So after that strategic advisory philanthropic work, I was in Seattle and moved back to the East Coast, and kind of slowly found my way to a set of communications firms, and started to kind of dip my toe back into communications. And a lot had changed, but was also very focused on all that was going on just with the various roles, so kind of felt at home in a way. Fortunately, was able to land positions at both Patagonia and Apple, where took all of that experience over those years to really think about how do you value align around the big projects that these organizations are focused on, and to be a part of a team that's helping to talk about the really good mission-driven things that both these companies have focused on over the years, and some of what they continue to do. And I'd say this, like, it's been a circuitous route, professional journey, but comms in a way has always been at its center, whether I was doing policy or whether I had a more traditional comms role. I guess I should say that now I'm at one strategy group. It's the combination of all of that, and so it's not just comms. It's thinking strategically about how do you, as you shared earlier, how do you ensure that senior C-suite leaders have the best information in front of them, that you're smart about what you're presenting to them because they need to make decisions. There's lots of decisions that need to be made, and so you want to make sure that what's in front of them is the very thing that they need to say yes, no to, let's hold. The founder of our company, David Medvin, talks about Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, and for many of my colleagues, we have those 10,000 hours, having sat in boardrooms, having been at the table to make decisions, help to make decisions, and to guide decisions, and doing the risk opportunity analysis to understand how best to approach a thing. So, long-winded answer to your question.
Oh no, that was great. I just want to unpack it a little more, which is, along the way, along your career path, you guys both have very esteemed careers. I'll give you three options, and maybe you can answer one or two of them, or all three, which is, you mentioned David's advice, maybe some of the best advice you ever received on this career path. Number two, how kind of the organizations that you work for, and you don't have to name them, could have better invested in your career success or just your general career development. And number three, maybe something that you wish you would have done along the way sooner to invest in yourself. I always tell people that I wish I would have majored in something different. So I majored in public relations, and I wish I would have been a history major, because so much of what speechwriters do is putting things in historical context. Or I wish I would majored in film so I could have become a better storyteller, something that would have contributed to the skills that I use all the time now. So it could be something that you wish someone could have done for you, something you wish you could have done for yourself, or advice that you did in fact receive. And maybe it's advice you didn't take, but advice nonetheless that would have been useful to you along the way.
So I feel very fortunate to say, I think I've had really good mentors and bosses along the way. And I know that's not the case for everyone. So I'm going to lean in on the question around what's a piece of advice that I've received. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I've received is being authentic, being true to you, and knowing that, I think also, I don't want to steal her words, but Tashonda Brown Duckett, CEO of TIAA, she often publicly speaks about the importance of your title is rented, but your character is what you own. And I think those are such important words that can take you pretty far, right? If you do your work with integrity, if you stay true to who you are, that takes you a long way. And so I've had mentors always press me on, like, is this you? Like, be authentic, show up as you. And so that's what I try to do. And it's taken me to interesting places. So that's cool.
Yeah. I don't know. In my mind, it's like a grab bag of a response to the three that you posted, or you posed. At the start of my career, I had just one really amazing boss, and I think she had very similar kind of approach and elements, which she was just really about authenticity and about kind of excellence and showing up as you are, because it's enough. And the other bosses and senior leaders in between haven't been as great. So it was really rewarding to have her at the start of my career, because it's really helped to shape it. And I randomly ran into her in New York City a couple of years ago. She and her husband were like in the middle of a median strip, and I was in a taxi going in the opposite direction that they were. I had the taxi flip back around, and I jumped out and kind of surprised them, and they were as shocked as I was to see them as they were to see me. But that relationship was so strong that I had to take that moment, even though I was heading off to a meeting. I think the middle proposition that you had, I think there's a thing about agency. And that even though we don't know what we don't know, is looking for opportunities to grow. I come from the world of saying yes to everything and pulling out the stops. Like if you need to do an all-nighter to get something done, you do it and you don't complain about it and you figure out how to get it done. I'm also of the mind, and I know this goes counter many men, which is asking for help when you need it. I'm not afraid to ask for help, but I'm also not afraid to do the work to get to a point to ask for help. And so I think that there's a sense, going back to kind of agency and saying, looking at the horizon, what kind of skills do I need to develop and mature to be a better professional? Today you're a communicator, tomorrow you might not be, or the next day you might come back to where you began. And so it's about, for me, it's been about trying to gather the skills, the experiences, developing the networks to just be a better professional. And it happens to be that I've spent most of my career in comms, but I think it benefits the larger kind of frame of being a successful professional. Not to say that I'm successful, I'm still trying to figure out how to be successful. Yeah. So.
Well, sometimes being authentic could be really hard in certain workplaces, and sometimes, working, I've definitely experienced that where I'm like, I'm just going to stay here till midnight and get it out the door, so I walk in the morning, I don't have to worry about it, but sometimes that can lead to burnout. So in cases like that, when...
Actually, may I ask a question?
Sure.
You got to tell us about your career journey.
My career journey, oh my gosh. So it's actually very similar to yours, Jonay. I'll just start. I went to law school. I did a federal clerkship in Michigan, decided that the law was not for me. And I wanted to go back and do communications because that's what I was doing before. I was a communications, I majored in public relations. I was doing it before I went to law school. And I always had this dream of being a speechwriter. I'm going to age myself a little bit, but I was in college when Barack Obama gave his big 2004 convention speech. And I was like, I don't want to be the person running for office, but I do want to be the person writing those words. And it took me a while to get there. So I decided after I decided to want to be a lawyer that I was going to try to make that happen for myself. And so I moved to Washington, D.C., because if you're going to do that, that's where you're going to do it, is right here. And I moved here in the last year of the Obama administration. And I was on LinkedIn. I'm like, how do people get into this? And trying to figure it out. And I found this organization called West Wing Writers, who takes on interns and fellows. And it's a prestigious speech writing firm here in town. And I applied for one of their coveted spots, and I happened to get it. And then Hillary Clinton lost the election, which, my big dreams of one day running for president had to be, back then, were put on hold. But the experience was amazing and fantastic, and I've been doing that ever since. But you're right, a lot of the skills I learned as a lawyer, how to make a case, how to speak concisely and how to write concisely was important. Now, you don't have to go to law school to do that. And in fact, I encourage you not to incur that debt in 3 years of your life if that's what you want to do. Because again, it's not a regret, but if I could do it differently, I might have done that a little differently and thought about that a little longer before I made such an investment. But that was my path in a nutshell
I want to meet the people who would stay the course. Because it's interesting just to compare folks that, you just have to be able to edit a little bit, right? You can't be completely perfect. You want to just edit that 1 year where you took off and you read 1,000 books and you came back smarter than ever.
Yeah.
Or you went and became an engineer.
Well, it's funny. I still say that being a lawyer is my superpower in the field because, there's 3 things that... when I'm writing something or trying to communicate something, I think about, which is usually I'm the person in the room who's the most risk averse. So I'm usually maybe let's not say that. Let's tone that down a little bit. We could say that differently. The second thing is, because I'm the most risk averse, when people are more risk averse than me, I usually challenge them. It's gonna be okay. We can say this thing. And then I usually, when I'm challenged on that front, what usually appeals to me is my sense of justice and fairness. It is okay if we say I'm sorry to this person, or it is okay if we publicly say we did something wrong. We're, in other cases we might be sued, but in this one we're not, so we could say it. And the third thing is how to make a case. A lot of people sometimes, when I'm talking to younger speechwriters or writers, and I see, a piece of writing for someone who's new to the field, oftentimes you'll get a piece of paper and it's a series of sentences that are just statements, and you're like, why is this not singing? And you're like, well, because we're not like influencing or persuading anybody to do anything. We're just like, it's more like a poem than a speech. And so that has been my superpower in this. And that's what I want to ask you guys next, which is, in light of, the challenging times that we're in, even if we're not in those times, it can be very challenging to step in a room and be authentic and work really hard and still get noticed for it. So what ways, if you have any examples or stories about how you might have, someone said this in the first session, shaken the table a little bit, and what were the outcomes of that, and what did you learn from it?
Eric, do you want to start with this one?
I don't know if I have any specific examples, but I'll riff, and I promise I'll come back if Jonay has one and runs with it, and then I'll think more on it. But I'll say this, and this just happened on Thursday of last week, which is probably also, it's just built into my DNA. I guess I don't take things hook, line, and sinker when people say them. And I was at a offsite retreat with my boss and client, and I challenged something that he said, respectfully, of course. But I think, when you're talking about authenticity and kind of showing up and kind of offering a counter, one that hopefully is driving the work forward, that's okay. And, you want to be strategic and thoughtful, and like not all occasions allow for that, and you have to be smart about that. But I think the work becomes better, and how you show up and how other colleagues who I work with kind of see that interaction where you can respectfully, strategically disagree because it's all for the better service of the work and for the client, that it can work. And so I think throughout my career, I've kind of started to find my voice and kind of understand who I am and my ability to do that, right? It didn't come at the very beginning. And as I think I've gained experience and kind of seen the various rooms and interactions that others have had, I've learned, I've listened, I've watched, I've maybe tested a little bit, but I think it is helpful to be able to not just take a thing on face value, but to challenge, because again, it hopefully improves the work and the output.
So I completely agree with that. And when I think about how I use my voice, one of my law school professors actually said, Jonay, you're not like, what are the gunners? That's what they call them. The person who has an answer for everything. That was just not my style. I would only speak if I had what I thought something actually thoughtful or something that would help contribute to the conversation. And he called me on it. He was like, you don't talk much, but when you do, it's always really, really good and thoughtful. And I would say the same for shaking the table. I don't shake the table often, but when I do, it's because I think it's something that matters, or it's a perspective that hasn't yet been considered and should be. And so, I've always been, I think there's a way to do it. You have to be respectful, and I've done it in some instances more times than I'd like to. But I think the recipients of that have always been very appreciative of it, and they've told me so. And so I think that there's a way to do it. And to your point, we have to create space for that dialogue and that in challenging and dissent, especially in this current environment. I think the perspectives of everyone should matter. And so we need to figure out space to make that possible, right? And how do you do that in a way that's thoughtful and helps move the conversation in a productive path. And so that's what I will add to Eric's excellent
I love this conversation because as you both were talking, I was thinking about times in which I learned how to speak up. And I think a professor told me a long time ago, speak up when your heart sings, and which is very, very nice way to put it. But I find myself speaking up when my mind is telling me, you will die on this hill, because this is important to get out. It's to say, to your point, no one has said it. And, I would rather for the people I work with to be mad at me in this room than mad at me out there when a microphone is in their face and they're caught off guard. And so that usually moves me, right, is the fact that like I'd rather get in trouble now as opposed to later. Or I'd rather say something and see this event or engagement, whatever it is, be successful than not. And if this is my last day at this job, then I will go home very, very happy and I'll be fine. Let's talk a little bit about workforce trends. And I want to talk to you both a little bit about what is giving you hope in this moment and what worries you about this moment. But hopefully you can answer that question in the reverse in that I asked it. So let's, what worries you about this moment? I know I've been thinking, the first half of this year, I thought a lot about, especially as a communicator, AI is going to take my job. I had a little bit of a panic, like, if something, if there's a machine out there that can do all the things that I do, what is going to become of me in 5 to 10 years? And then that calmed down because, we're good at what we do, and machines are not good enough to take over completely what you do, and we still add value, as the session is talking about. But in the right now, I'm a little bit worried about the laws and norms. A lot of what I do depends on the strength of the First Amendment and it protecting me and the people that I work for. A lot of me getting hired or fired depends on, anti-discrimination laws still being in place. And so there's a lot of things to think about in terms of the workplace right now. What gives me hope, I will let you guys answer that first, are quite a few things, but I will let you all kick that off. What worries you and what gives you hope?
Yeah, so worry first or hope first? Hope first?
Worries first.
Worries
Let's end on
first.
a positive note.
Yeah, okay. All right, very well. If you insist. It's easy to talk about AI. I mean, it's a thing that's in our face, so I'll try to be true to that. I think that AI is going to be a challenge, but I see it kind of differently. I think, if you think about like spell check and grammar check, right? We all use it, right? It's more autonomous today than when you had to kind of start it at the end of writing a thing and then have it review and then kind of turn it off. And now it's just baked in, like there's a little wiggly line underneath. And that's kind of like machine learning, right? We've been living with that for a real long time. So I see AI both as a challenge because you're right, it's going to start, our folks are right that it's going to start doing these menial tasks and it's already doing them relatively well. But I think we have to figure out how it becomes a value add. It's like you're in construction, you wear a tool belt, right? You've got a hammer, you've got a wrench, you've got all these other assets, right? It's how do we leverage it in its way to make us better? Spell check makes us better because hopefully it's caught all of the spelling mistakes and the grammar mistakes and it makes us sound better. And the words are spelled correctly despite the fact that it was the wrong word, but it's still spelled correctly. So I worry about that a little bit, but I also see the kind of the silver lining and how it can be a real tool for extending our greatness, if you will. So I think that's both the hope and the worry. But I would say that the bigger worry for me, and I think akin to what you said, is about kind of the environment and the world that we live in today. But I think the silver lining here, and I guess I'll explain the worry a bit more, which is, First Amendment, like everything, it seems like it's been turned upside down. And I don't know if we have a real sense of like, is this just a momentary blip, or are we sitting here in a long time in this dark place? I guess the little hope that I have is that when I talk to my friends, I kind of, I'll be on TikTok or Instagram or somewhere else, and I'll share a clip, and I'll try to like dissect what someone said and say, you see how they said like this, or like, why did they make this announcement now when they could have waited a couple of months to kind of make a bigger announcement with a bigger number? Or taking apart some of the speeches over the last couple of days and kind of saying, wait a minute, there's some real problem here that we need to all talk about. That's my communicator brain working. And so I think the hope, the silver lining for me is that these are, for communicators in particular, these are interesting moments. They're like case studies of like how communications is being done. You may disagree with the dark arts and how like they are being leveraged, But this is comms at its best and at its worst. And so I think what's interesting about this panel is that I don't think that today and tomorrow's communicators are people who just went to school to study public relations and communications. It is going to require an interdisciplinary cadre of communicators to think differently about comms for the future that we are leaning into, to get us to a different point. And so that's a mixed bag of both worry and hope, but I think it is this challenge of parsing and trying to understand both the challenge, but also is there an opportunity that's baked in? And I think more often than not there is. We've just got to figure out how to see it and then kind of grasp it.
I think my biggest worry right now is the hyper-polarized environment that we are in a way that it's so polarizing that people aren't talking to each other anymore. Like, and part of that is because of how we receive information, how we receive news. The news, I watch MSNBC, CNN, I watch Fox News, and you can watch, usually MSNBC and CNN are tracking the same top stories. You turn on Fox, it's a whole different set of information. And so I just worry that we're not, facts are dependent on where you receive news, and we're talking past each other. And one hope that I have is that we learn how to do a better job of communicating across political lines. I've had the benefit of working in both conservative and liberal environments, and I actually think that we're more aligned in what we all want than what you would otherwise think from watching the news. And so that's one wish I have. I know you didn't ask for a wish, but I wish that we
Wishes,
were
hopes,
doing a better
dreams,
job
all of it. Please tell me.
communicating. But that goes to better messaging. And so for example, I actually think diversity, equity, and inclusion, using that as an example, I think it's a necessary thing, but I also think this is an opportunity for us to really think about what should it look like, because I actually don't think it was all the way where it needed to be to begin with. And so it wasn't doing what it needed to do to start. And so how do we actually take this moment to think differently about what it should look like? And part of that, I think, will require thoughtful messaging and also bringing in the other side, so to speak. And so making sure that we're more values aligned in a way that's helpful to more than less. And then the thing that I think gives me a lot of optimism is Gen Z. Gen Z, y'all are cool. But I will say, I think, looking at some of the data around Gen Z and being values aligned and making sure that their employers are values aligned, I think it's something like 70% or more of Gen Z, when they're looking for a job, they're looking for an organization who is aligned with their values. I'm a millennial, early millennial, so I grew up typing on a typewriter.
Seasoned.
It's seasoned. And so...
It's a typewriter.
Yeah, exactly, right? When you're talking about a spell check, I didn't have that. I mean, yeah, we had what we had. So my parents had a typewriter. That's how I learned how to type. Computers did exist. We just didn't have one. And so, but I think about, this generation who's coming out with, they have information at their fingertips. And I think that's a gift and a curse, because I think one thing that we potentially might miss with this generation is the ability, Gen Z does a great job of questioning authority but wanting to make sure that they have all the tools to do it in a way that's thoughtful and yeah.
I tell Gen Z that I've worked with in the past, I'm also a seasoned millennial, is I love the questioning of authority, but sometimes I think I'm the authority, and I am not. So I understand I am older and maybe more senior, but sometimes the authority lies in other places, but I do admire that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's an empowering generation, and I think there's so many lessons to learn from how they show up and them being really authentic to who they are, and that's a gift, and so we should harness that as older generations as much as possible.
Yeah, Gen Z does a really good job at holding on to their convictions. And I'm like, yeah, make sure we get remote work. I really appreciate you guys championing that. One thing that gives me hope is I was telling both of you, last week Issa Rae was in town and I had an opportunity to go to her book talk. A lot of people didn't realize it was a book talk, but she has a book. It's only available on Audible, and it's really good. But there was a political speechwriter in the audience who asked her a great question. And while I don't remember exactly what that question was, I think it was along the lines about how she finds joy in this environment. But I do remember her response was really good, which is she was telling a story of the reason she got into writing down stories and telling them was it was a way to build community and to find her people. It wasn't necessarily the writing per se. It was when she was watching TV growing up and reading books, she felt affirmed by the characters that represented her, and she, understand how important that feeling is to other people, which is what brings me hope here, because I think that sometimes we as individuals can undervalue our role and how good we are at communications, not realizing communications is a tool to find your people, or if you're writing for somebody else, an opportunity to find the communities that agree or our values aligned with them. And sometimes lately when we hear people that we hold up as heroes or respect, and they put out certain messages and we get distressed or we get angry or we get upset, we wonder why. I realize in that moment it's because the community that they're building through their words doesn't include me, or it includes people in audiences that I thought were not invited to the party. And it's not to exclude them, but it's sometimes their ideas are so loud and wrong in the face of what people are facing right now. Then you wonder, how are we building community together? And sometimes the answer you come to is maybe that person who's giving the message doesn't want us to build that community together. But we have the power to remind people that those messages are important and that you do build community through the things that you say. And that's our superpower for everyone in this room. I know we have a little bit more time. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for our audience members, whether it's about their career or about, I have questions, but I want to open it up. Okay, well, then my last, yes, please.
This is very much on the fly.
Okay.
I don't work in comms, but I do understand the importance of comms. I'm more so the government affairs, strategic partnerships. And I think during this time, especially why I want to attend this, is more than ever, messaging is so important. I think you all talked about Gen Z, and I think about in this time now, a lot of folks have a problem with the Democratic Party because of the messaging and their response. And I see that translate in a lot of things for work. So as someone who is not a comms professional, what can we do to make sure that, one, that you all feel valued, two, in this moment, how can we uplift you and work with you in tandem strategically for, one, that I'm able, as for someone that is in the government affairs part, to be able to utilize the messaging that you have used to uplift whatever I'm trying to do.
Okay, so can you repeat the first part of your question so I can repeat it so it can be heard again?
So the first part is, for one, how can we, people who are not comms professionals, value you all more and integrate within our message? And then the second part is more so, I think I forgot, but
I think I got you. I think
got
your
it.
first question is how can non-comms people value more comms people in their workplace? And the second question was how can non-comms people uplift the work that we're doing and how we can work together?
I'll give a stab at it. I think it's really simple and maybe a little bit cheeky and silly, but I think just walking across the aisle, the hallway, and really getting to know your comms colleagues and talking with them about what you're working on, sharing that, and seeing if there are ways for them to be part of what you're working on, or maybe it's vice versa. Like they're working on something, they didn't know you were working on something, and so they bring you in. But whether it's walking across the aisle or kind of breaking down that virtual barrier, I think does a lot. And for me over the last several years, developing those relationships that I mentioned earlier across the business are so important. And you've given like an example of that, right? Like while you might sit side by side with a colleague, you're in government affairs, they're maybe in a comms function, and so you guys don't sit on the same teams, perhaps, right? And so figuring out a way just to cross that little barrier, whether it's real or virtual, I think goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just double click on what Eric said because he said it so well. You also learn a lot from when you have those conversations. You get to see things through a different perspective, lens, and it may also get you thinking about something you hadn't thought about. And so, not to be totally repetitive of Eric, but like I wholeheartedly agree with like those conversations matter. And then I also would say not just you know. I would have conversations with people who you disagree with too, because I actually think that those sometimes are some of the most helpful conversations because it allows you to also take another look at your messaging to see like where are their gaps, where are there opportunities to make it tighter, what are you missing that you may not have otherwise picked up on, and really question yourself. And I think that self-evaluation and taking another look at your work is very helpful. But part of being able to do that in an informed way is by having those conversations with diverse set of stakeholders, including those who you may not be aligned with or agree with. Because I do think it'll only makes your product or whatever your message is stronger.
May I add one other point? You mentioned you used the word messages, and whenever I hear that, I always think audience, right? You need to understand your audience before you can really understand your message. And so whether the communicator is helping you realize that, or you're talking to the communicator about the kind of what your outcome might be, it's really good to kind of start kind of back at that very basic, almost like comms 101 space, because your message for Gen Z is going to be different than your message for a boomer, right? Your message for people who make widgets is going to be different than for the folks that are making like cars, right? And so it's just trying to understand the component parts so that when they all come together, they are having they are purposeful and the intent is being achieved based on all of the pieces that you have to put together.
That's so important because it's comms 101, but I go back to that all the time. It's when I'm writing something and like someone edits it, I'm like, who's our audience? Remember, it is not you, it is not me, it is the people who are going to be sitting and listening. Is there any more questions that people might have? Do you have a question? Sure. Last question.
My name's Mark. Nice to meet everyone. Mark. I'll be kind of spitballing, but I'll keep it brief.
That's okay.
My question has to do with like the level of noise. Of course, we've lived in a noisy world for a while, and I do appreciate your comment, towards Gen Z. I believe in this too. Children are the future, all that. But my question would be, like, I do think that we're going through a critical thought kind of epidemic, and it's not only Gen Z, just widespread. And like you said, people usually division fuels engagement. So usually the clickbait and the what do you call it? Like the sound bites kind of like fuel conversation. So everyone in this room is thoughtful, but it seems like we're going towards like an oratory, griot kind of culture. Like people aren't reading; they're more so like listening. So how are you like able to cut through that noise, having seen through the Obama administration, things prior to where we are now? How have you like adjusted the strategy to try to not only retain your audience, but like bring more people who just don't really listen?
That's a really good question. And the question is, in the world of clickbaits and sound bites, how do you break through the noise to retain audiences and to reach new audiences?
Great question. I think some part of it is, it's not just the clickbait, it's also how information, and you hit on this in your question, how people are taking in information. It's not necessarily, you're not reading the newspaper or a news article, you're looking at a reel or listening to a podcast, right? And so I think as a business owner, I have started to think through ways to share my information in different ways that reach audiences in a different way. So I have a newsletter, right? But I also started I don't call myself an influencer, but I might get there one day. And so I started a video podcast, right? Short reels though, like very short content that I can put out on social. And so I think I'm not naturally that way. And so like having to force myself to do that, I think is probably a necessary part of where we are. Like that's just how people receive information. So I know that does not answer your question because that's a very hard question, but I'll let Eric maybe take a stab.
I will answer this and I'll go to Eric and then we'll close it out. But I think my answer to this is I'm naturally introverted, meaning that I thrive better when I'm actually just talking to small groups of people. And my way to break through the noise is honestly just having phone conversations and talking to the people. I mean, you can change the world, but I think for me, it starts with just the people around me. Like, I don't always have to hold a microphone. Usually my microphone is being like, Mom, that YouTube movie that you saw is disinformation. You know, like, it's something like that, and tuning, you know, helping people attune to their critical thinking skills, which nowadays is tough. And I think the more I do that, and the more then I can broaden my perspective. Like, I'm in some book clubs, meaning we are intentionally reading books once a month, and then we're talking about them. And so it goes to that thing about community and finding your people, and how, you know, there's more people that are like you than you think, and just being around them and communicating in the ways that, you know, that benefit one another and get through the noise. And then, you know, in terms of career though, I think really it's still important, as you mentioned, is to go to people where they are. If they're on Instagram, Kamala Harris's book, Vice President Kamala Harris's book came out this morning, and I got my Audible notification that I have it now. So I listened to the first 5 chapters, and there was an interesting part where she talks about her social media strategy during the campaign. And she talks about she used Instagram to reach millennials, she used TikTok to reach Gen Z, she used Twitter to reach political junkies, and Facebook probably to reach everybody else. And I thought that was a smart, common sense strategy, right? Like, you go to people where they are to break through that kind of noise. And you really have to segment communities.
I agree with both of you. I endorse all of it. And I think, Ashley, what you just said towards the tail end of what you were saying, I think was aligning with what I was thinking, which is, and it's not maybe a direct answer to your question, but I think it's about having a healthy, somewhat of a balanced diet. Right, like you do a little bit of reading, you do a little bit of kind of digital social, you do a little bit of like the substacking, right? Like, you balance the plate in ways that kind of gives you a little bit of everything. And I think, you know, for our clients, we're thinking about where do we want to position and place them to reach the audiences that matter to them, whether it's a LinkedIn strategy or thinking about an all digital strategy, or we need to think about an op-ed. I will agree with you that I think over a much longer period than just the last 3 to 5 years that we've seen like just a reduction in people's interest in reading, but we've also seen the rise of content and the different varieties of content. I don't think that just because people don't read, they're not critically thinking, though I think it is really important to be able to both write critically and to read those critical expositions, because it just helps the brain. Both the writing part and the reading part, I think, are essential. But I mean, you can get that from other places too, but it's really incumbent upon all of us to think about how do we balance our diet so that we're not too carb heavy or too protein heavy, right? It's like we got to make a good balance for ourselves, but also as communicators and working with clients and others to think strategically about how do you balance that kind of plate, if you will, for them.
Final word I will leave with the two of you. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
Be yourself, be authentic, find your voice, find the voice that makes sense to you, and make sure it's tailored to the audiences that you're trying to reach.
I think I go back to what I said a little bit earlier, which is for some, this is a dark time. But if you look at it from a different vantage point, it offers the opportunity to kind of think differently about communications and to evaluate and say, wow, they're using an approach that elicits this and achieves these kind of objectives. When else do you have in your life the opportunity to kind of see this in real time and to be able to be like, hey, I don't like that, but I want to do something like this that has a similar type of or a better type of reaction and response. And so, earlier in my career, I went to public health school. COVID was terrible, but I was so glad to have a public health degree as that was unfolding, because I understood the basics of epidemiology. I understood the issues around spreading of diseases and the importance of public health messaging. And so it offered me insight into the Trump administration is saying this about disease and viruses. If I was in the seat, I would want to focus in this area. And I think that this moment right now, for many of us, is really challenging and it's dark, but it offers the seeds of ideas to do something different, and I would hope better, that improves the lives and conditions of many people and not just smaller communities.
Thank you both so much. That was incredible. I really appreciate it. I know the audience does too, so thank you.
Thank you.